Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. You're watching TechStrong TV, and today's Wednesday, June 3rd. Thanks for joining us. Hump Day here in the first week in June. It's episode 46. You know, we're well into our 9th week of TV shows. I want to tell you that tomorrow's a really big day for us here at TechStrong TV. Our TechStrong Con event is tomorrow. It's 12 hours from 9 a.m. Eastern to 9 p.m. Eastern. 12 hours. For our friends in Europe, you can log in. It'll still be afternoon for you, our friends in Asia, and it'll go right up until 9 p.m. Eastern time. So we've got about 50 speakers, amazing speakers too. Some really, really just people that I actually admire, and I'm looking forward to their presentations. For tomorrow's show, we're actually going to try to broadcast some of the TechStrong TV events live on our TechStrong TV show. So tune in tomorrow for that. But why do that when you can actually tune into the show itself? Go to TechStrongCon.com, register. It's still free. There are slots. I think there are still slots available. Check it out, and we hope to see you there. For today's show, for Wednesday, though, we've got some good interviews. Number one, I've been trying to get this gentleman on for a couple months now, and I was really happy that he agreed to join. I'm going to be interviewing the CEO president of BMC, Ayman Zahari. Ayman, of course, was former president, chief product officer at CA, which is where I first met him maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And he's been doing some interesting stuff at BMC since coming aboard, including some very exciting acquisitions in the mainframe DevOps space. And he's going to talk to us about that today. So we're going to kick things off with Ayman. Then we're going to be speaking with Tal Weiss of Overops, and they just did a state of software quality survey that I think you'll find interesting. And then Gary Groover is our guest for the Something Old segment from the archives today. We're going back to a presentation Gary did at DevOps Experience last fall, our own virtual event, and it's called Engineering the Digital Transformation. If you're not familiar with Gary, he's an analyst with Accelerated Strategies Group, but he's also a renowned author on DevOps and digital transformation, as well as a practitioner. He's led HP Printers division on their digital transformation story, as well as Macy's.com. So we'll be with Gary. And then right after that, we'll do today's news. And then, as is usual here, we're going to hand things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. Charlene has some interesting interviews today. And then Mitchell Ashley on the Analyst Corner. Mitchell has some good guests lined up. And that'll close things out for Wednesday, June 3rd. I'll be back to wrap it up then. So let's take a quick break for a commercial, and we'll come back with our interview of Ayman Zahari.
Tech is strong. We may be working from home, but tech goes on. Tech will continue to collaborate. Tech will continue to communicate. Tech is strong. Join us for TechStrong Con, June 4th, 12 hours strong, TechStrong. Featuring John Bacha-Galupe Willis, Shannon Leitz, William Hurley, Jasmine James, Kat Swatell, Cornelia Davis, James Wickett, Courtney Kistler, Damon Edwards. Live Q&A with speakers, exhibit halls, and more. Free, but register before spots fill at techstrongcon.com.
So, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I first met Ayman Zahari while he was President Chief Product Officer at CA, or CA Technologies, as I think it was known then. And, of course, CA was acquired by Broadcom probably 2.5 years ago. Ayman moved on from CA and was, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, appointed CEO President of BMC Software. Really a great position for Ayman, but really a great move by BMC. Ayman's a very intelligent, great leader. I think it'll come across in my interview with them. And today they made a very important announcement regarding their recent acquisition of CompuWare, which really leaves BMC as a real power player in the mainframe software space, especially in terms of mainframe DevOps and developer tools and monitoring. So here's my interview with Ayman Zahari, CEO of BMC.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, here for another TechStrong TV interview. I'm really happy to have my guest with me here on this interview. He's someone I had the pleasure of meeting probably 3 or 4 years ago at another company he was an executive at, and I've wanted to have him on here ever since he joined BMC. It's Ayman Syed, CEO, President, I believe, of BMC. Ayman, welcome to TechStrong TV. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be here and great seeing you again.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to I see your home like most of us are. I hope all is well with you and the family and you've gotten through this safe and sound
We're all doing well. We're all safe and healthy and adjusted to working, studying, all of us at home. So certainly been interesting couple of months for all of us, but it's amazing how quickly we adjusted.
It really is. And all of, I mean, especially in the tech industry, we were talking off camera, this is why we call it TechStrong TV. Tech is strong, right? It's resilient like this, like the internet is. But I'm glad you're well. Let's jump in. BMC announced some big news yesterday. You could tell our audience.
Absolutely. We announced our plan or intent to acquire CompuWare, which is very exciting for us. CompuWare is a company that we've known and partnered with for a long time. It's a company that has a portfolio that's very complementary to ours, and I believe that the combination of BMC and CompuWare is going to serve our customers well and enable us to tackle some of their key challenges and generate a lot of value for them.
Yes, and just to make sure our audience is clear, the deal, the act or the intent to acquire CompuWare was announced. It's got to be 6 or 8 months ago, right?
Absolutely, and good news is that this week we just closed this deal, and it's an exciting time for us as we start bringing the two companies together and driving integration. As you know, BMC has been focused in solving some of the biggest challenges and supporting some of the most mission critical systems on mainframe for our customers for a long time, and so has CompuWare. While we have different areas of focus and a very complementary platforms or product portfolios, together we would be able to offer an end-to-end solution to many of our mainframe customers and enabling them to future-proof that platform, keep it going as a mission-critical platform and a key part of their IT backbone.
Absolutely. And you're right. BMC has been known as a major player in the mainframe ecosystem probably for as long as I've been in technology, 20 years, maybe 25 years at least. CompuWare was a name that was also been around for a long time, but they went through, there was a bit of a history there. The Dynatrace kind of thing spun off and then all. But, certainly when Chris O'Malley came in as CEO, they really started making noise as sort of the scrappy kid on the block, right? Because people think of mainframes, and they think of BMC and IBM and CA, a company you were president of. Right? I think of these big tech. CompuServe was that scrappy kid from Detroit, right? Who told it like it was, right? I've had the pleasure of interviewing Chris many times, and I enjoyed the interviews. Quite frankly, he had good stuff to say, but their products, sometimes the walk has to match the talk. And their product's walk matched Chris's talk.
Absolutely. So I think Chris and his team did a fabulous job over the last few years in evolving their portfolio and shifting some of their focus to solving some of the biggest challenges and unmet need for customers on the app dev front. So you're quite right, and both BMC and CompuWare are both storied brands. They've been around for a while. BMC started over 30 years ago as a mainframe software company, and that was the initial focus of the company. And over the last few decades, they expanded and diversified into every aspect of every platform in IT towards business apps and business software and enterprise software, if you would. Our portfolio in the mainframe tackles some of the biggest challenges there in database management and system management and provisioning and in security. CompuWare similarly have a long heritage in mainframe, and over the last few years, they've pivoted some of their focus towards app dev or application development for the mainframe. When you look at the two companies, I mean, together it's a match made in heaven, and that's why we're so excited about starting the integration now. As I mentioned, no overlap in portfolio, and our area of focus for the last few years are quite complementary. As you know, Alan, mainframe is a mission-critical platform that powers much of the backbone for large companies, most of the Fortune 100, 500 companies. While a lot of us talk about mobile apps and cloud apps and so on, day to day, and most of what we do day in and day out, whether you're buying something in Amazon, you're paying something for PayPal, or you're using even a movie review search engine or whatever, you invariably are triggering a transaction into mainframe. Utilization bandwidth MIPS have been increasing, and we issue a survey every year for mainframe customers, and more than 70% of the Fortune 500 use it, and the vast majority of them are planning to increase the MIPS and utilization. So it's a mission-critical platform that's very scalable, available, and secure. The cost performance lends itself well to high bandwidths and high processing power applications. And it's important for us to continue to support these customers and enable them as well as future-proofing their investments. So as I look, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead. I'll let you finish your thought.
As you can tell, I am passionate about the topic. I can probably talk about it for hours. But when I talk to our key customers, and a lot of them have been getting great feedback on why the combination of CompuWare and BMC makes sense, their two biggest unmet needs as we move into the future are how does he future-proof the platform by addressing the two biggest issues: the scarcity of specialized skills and specialized crew and operations, and how to add more developers as some of the current development teams are aging and getting out of the workforce. And between the two companies, we believe we have the solution for both of these issues. BMC focused a lot in our AMI, or Automated Mainframe Intelligence. This is adding AI ops by embedding artificial intelligence into our management to automate management, provisioning, monitoring, remediation, health, and security mainframe. And CompuWare have been investing in application development, modernize the tool chain to support Agile and DevOps in mainframe so that you can introduce a new generation of developers. They hit the ground running in mainframes, they see the same look and feel and can use the same tools they're accustomed to using on the distributed side and in the cloud.
It's really interesting, you know, the way you describe it. It's almost like CompuWare brings the dev and BMC brings the ops, and you put them together and you have DevOps, and that's a great thing. The other thing I just want to emphasize is, in addition to probably the lowest cost, you know, MIPS at a MIPS or per transaction, however you want to, you know, measure your cost, it's also the most secure platform, right? That's really been hardened and battle tested, and you know, not and in this age with COVID, we're seeing cybersecurity become such a, I mean, there's no denying now that you got to have strong security in your forward facing.
Absolutely, Alan. When you look at it from scalability and scale property, from availability, and then most importantly, and top of mind for many of our customers now, most secure platform. You don't hear about breaches or attacks on mainframe often. Very stable platform, very secure, and we're continuing to augment this. When you look at our AMI for security, for example, it embeds also AI to be able to predict and anticipate exposure and mitigate it proactively. I believe that platform has a lot of potential, and it's reflected in customers' investment in it, how many of them are increasing their MIPS footprint, etc.
Absolutely. I want to focus also in though I'm on this whole DevOps thing, because you mentioned developers retiring. We need a new one of the biggest articles we ran in the year 2019, last year, was called "The Beauty of the COBOL Programming Languages." Can I tell you, it's gotten hundreds of thousands of views, that one article, because it amazes us how many people are still, and how many applications are still written. We saw it with the unemployment. When people went to file for unemployment, these state systems, which are all running on mainframe, right? Another big vertical for mainframes, government. They had to upgrade their systems. They couldn't find programmers.
Absolutely. It's one of the probably, if you're a computer science graduate and you want to look for something where there's going to be continuing lucrative employment and high demand for it, it's a great area. And this is one of the things I find very appealing and attractive about CompuWare, and what they've done was modernizing the development and focus on app dev. It's everything from having a modern IDE, development environment, to being able to model and visualize code and architecture, to how do you manage testing and automate testing, to building a continuous integration, continuous development, continuous delivery pipeline, and integrating with popular third-party tools and open source tools. So they're actually able to take university graduates from University of Michigan and Illinois and just put them in mainframe, and they're hitting the ground running, becoming productive in no time. This is something that many of our customers, if not all of them, really need. And that's why we believe that the combination of this and AI ops addresses their two biggest unmet needs and future-proofs the platform for them.
Absolutely. We of course at DevOps.com, we follow the mainframe or DevOps for mainframe market pretty closely. And what's amazed me personally is the entire industry, BMC, CompuWare, IBM, CA, they've all, in the words of Bruce Springsteen, they made that guitar sing. And they've made mainframes sing, right? The tools that are available, the Topaz is a great example, right, of the CompuWare Topaz suite. What's available to developers today on what they could do? There's virtually nothing they can't do, from running Linux to containers to anything on the mainframe.
Absolutely. You're used to using GitHub. Guess what? You can use it in mainframe. You want a bit of choice, and we're able to integrate with these and give you the same look and feel, same environment. And it's reflected exactly what you said. All this focus and enablement is reflected in the sentiment. And when you go and talk to customers, 70% of Fortune 500 companies are using mainframes today. And when you go and ask them, and there is like over 5 billion lines of code, of mainframe code. I can go on rattling off stats and give you like how pervasive it is. But the amazing and interesting thing is when you ask CIO, and the latest survey we had, 80%, 88% of them believe that the mainframe will be a key business asset over the next few decades, not few years, and that they're going to continue to expand use and footprint there. That's why enabling them, that's what enables that, and that's what drives this.
Absolutely. And this is the interesting thing I always see about mainframes, Ayman, is 75% of the Fortune 500 use them, or Fortune 100. You never hear a story of someone saying, I'm taking the mainframe down, or I'm taking, we're migrating off of our mainframe. No one migrates off the mainframe. They may move systems of engagement to a cloud or whatever. But those systems of records, those back ends, those transactional kind of programs,
You can't beat them.
30 billion business transactions a day. That's just to keep things in perspective, just to give you the magnitude of this. There is hardly an hour of the day goes by when not every one of us touch a mainframe one way or another. Whether you're withdrawing money,
The world we live in.
you're buying something online, you're looking for a movie recommendation, you're buying a ticket somewhere, you're invariably triggering a mainframe interaction.
we only have a few minutes left, Ayman. I wanted to go to one other area. So now that the acquisition is complete, and we're bringing together certainly the corporate or the product line into under one, will it still be CompuWare Topaz? Does it become BMC Topaz? What, from a branding point of view, what are you thinking?
Being very thoughtful in how we integrate CompuWare into BMC. It's going to be one company, and it's BMC. We're starting with it's a CompuWare, a BMC company, and we're integrating the teams and the products. But the guiding principle in all of this is for our customers, and they are the ones who are focused on them and their success. We're doing everything to make sure that it's business as usual. There is continuity and roadmaps. The good news here, Alan, is that we have very complementary product portfolio. We've partnered with CompuWare for many years and gone to market together as partners. We know the people. It's a very compatible and consistent culture, business model, and architecture. So we expect the integration to go very smoothly. The products will continue to exist. You'll still have Topaz, IPSW, and will maintain and accelerate the investment and the feature velocity, etc. Certainly, that is the plan. And above everything else, we are 100% committed to ensuring that we continue to support our customers and ensure their success.
Fantastic. I mean, we are out of time. I apologize. I could talk to you all day about this, to tell you the truth. But first of all, congratulations on the completion of the acquisition. You've got a great product there, some great talent, and keep doing what you're doing, man. And we didn't even get a chance to talk about in terms of everything going on with COVID now. How has this affected market? Maybe we could have another discussion in a couple of weeks or whatever. But just think where we would be today without the mainframe, right? And it's not a pretty picture.
Absolutely. It's time like this that where we all look for the stability, the reliability, and availability of systems of record and platforms like the mainframe. And we're excited about like bringing these two great companies together, about welcoming the CompuWare team and accelerating our ability to innovate and drive solutions for our customers. Thank you very much, Alan, and great to be in the show talking to you.
All right. My friend Ayman Syed, CEO, President BMC. BMC completing their acquisition of CompuWare. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Our next interview today features CTO Tal Weiss at OverOps. Tal's going to give us a little background on OverOps because I don't know if our audience is really familiar yet with them, as well as discuss the State of Software Quality Survey and the results from it that they recently completed. So here's my interview with Tal Weiss of OverOps.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this segment. Our guest for this segment on TechStrong TV is Tal Weiss, CTO for OverOps. Hey Tal, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Good to be with you.
Good to have you here. Tal, I think we had, on one of our, Mike Vizard actually wrote an article about OverOps, but it was probably, I want to say 2 months ago. I don't know how familiar our audience is yet with OverOps. So why don't we start there? Give us a little bit of the OverOps story. Excuse me. And maybe you can include kind of how, your own personal story in there as well.
Sounds good. The two are pretty well intertwined. So I started OverOps, and the goal was to really help with a lot of the issues and the pain points and the challenges that I faced when I first started a company, and we sold it and we took the product and we launched it and we started getting millions of users on the technology we were developing at that time, which was great on one hand. But then what we saw, that the pressure to push software out there on one hand, while on the other hand, making sure that things are stable and reliable was so hard, so manual. We were still using log files, alerting tools in the same way that people have been doing for 20 years. And we just thought to ourselves, how can we leverage so many of these new technologies, cloud compute power, code analysis algorithms, machine learning, to help companies ensure that their software is not just continuously integratable and deliverable, but also continuously reliable. So they can identify, they can prevent it, they can resolve issues before customers are impacted, so they don't have to go through so much of the pain that we did in our early days. So that's kind of our mission and how we kind of got started in our core area of focus.
Got it. And you've been there from the beginning. Yeah.
Yep.
And how long ago was this, Tal?
We really got going, this was, I think like 6 or 7 years ago, we really started kind of building out the company, started moving from an idea to an actual product. And from this faraway vision that we had towards this technology that could actually analyze your code as it's executing and tell you exactly when, where, why it breaks, all the way from test staging to production, to actually seeing it power some of the world's largest banks, telcos, healthcare companies, has been an amazing journey for the company and even for myself. So I'm just very happy to see this vision come to life.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. All right. Oh, you know what we didn't mention, though? And if people want more information on OverOps, the website?
Sure. It's just overops.com. And also, I would highly encourage folks to check out blog.overops.com, because we share a lot of the research that we've done, and so much of the knowledge is shared there on a weekly basis. There's hundreds of thousands and millions of visitors every year to our blog, and folks really get some good value out of it. So either overops.com or blog.overops.com, check it out.
Excellent. All right, man. Now we're ready to dive into this survey you guys released yesterday.
Yeah, so
talk to us.
Oh, please. So every year we just kind of do a state of the software survey, if you will, trying to understand kind of where are folks right now, but also try to read through the tea leaves to see where folks are going, and especially year over year, that has really been key for us in making pretty good predictions as to where the industry is going in terms of cultures, in terms of tools, in terms of investment. So that was kind of, we're just released now the 2020 survey. And I found some really, really interesting tidbits within it that I think maybe the audience would be also interested in learning about.
Go ahead, tell us.
Sure. So, one thing that we looked at, and again, I'm just, if I'm glancing to the sides, just, I have some notes for all the interesting stats. I want to make sure I give everybody exact, accurate reading. So it's interesting to see that even to this day, folks, and most of the folks that we spoke with, hundreds of companies are from North America and from Europe, so a lot from here in Silicon Valley, so kind of representing kind of the leading edge, if you will, but also a good representation of your traditional enterprise. And we saw that, first of all, the amount of time people spend troubleshooting code and staging in production is huge. People, even to this day, 10 to 25% of the companies say they spend on average per respondent about 1 day a week. And then 26 to 50% of respondents say they spend 2 days a week. So we're talking about almost 30% of the time within the industry for DevOps folks, developers, and even people on the build and ops side spending such a tremendous amount of time troubleshooting issues to this day. And to us, maybe in software, it makes sense. But if I were to tell you that engineers in the automotive industry are spending 30 to 40% of the time trying to figure out why their cars don't work, you'd be amazed. You'd be like, that cannot possibly be a real number. Another key figure that was really, really interesting to me is, and we asked them, what are some of the top challenges as they relate to the quality of your application? And the answer kind of blew me away, because I thought that people are just going to say, well, we don't have a big enough team, we don't have the time, we need more people. And that was 44% of the respondents. But actually 48% of the respondents came away with something which to me really was interesting. They actually said, we lack sufficient tooling and automation. Because usually, traditionally, when it came to software quality, it was more about just like, let's muscle through it. Just like test it better, write more testing, write more unit testing, do more manual testing. And you see a switch within the industry. And the industry is predominantly still, again, to me, a mind-blowing statistic. 70% of testing in this industry is still manual.
Manual.
Yeah, is Anno Domini 2020, and we're
It's kind of like the soft-white underbelly of the whole continuous testing thing, is that, yeah, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a ton of manual testing. And to your point, Tal, I think people have also realized that there's just not enough people on Earth to keep throwing people at this problem and think it's going to go away. It becomes we used to think if I had more time and more people, I'd solve this issue. But I think people have now realized, number one, no one's going to wait for more time and more people. They're just going to keep releasing, right? Because you got deadlines and everything else. But number two, throwing more people at it, I was in China, like, I guess it was last year, and there was this huge, I was up in what they call a water town, like 3 hours north of Beijing. And it was a water town because they dig a reservoir, and that's where they used to keep water for the troops who were guarding, the Great Wall of China. And this was dug, 2,000 years ago, whenever. And, Tal, a reservoir the size of a Great Lake, you know what I mean? This is a big reservoir, dug by hand, because they would bring 100,000 people with shovels and say, okay, this is where you're going to live for 4 years, shoveling every day, right? That don't work with QA testing or, testing on software. We can't bring 100,000 people and take 4 years to run every test, that you'd want to run in your testing regimen. If you don't automate doing this, we die. And so I'm not surprised that people are starting, I'm actually pleasantly surprised that people are starting to realize that.
It's interesting because, even when we talk about automated testing, it is still a developer manually writing the test and then running it over and over and over. So even there, there's a significant level of manual work and also foresight. So one of the key things that folks talked about here in the survey is that they need a tremendous amount of foresight to know ahead of time what's going to go wrong. And you saw that even a few weeks ago, especially in the turbulent time that we live in. Take a company like Robinhood, right? A multi-billion unicorn startup. And when essentially trading volatility started hitting the markets just like a month ago, and he did a whole write-up on that on the blog, their software, the developers never had foresight to foresee that such a thing could happen. All those edge conditions, all those things, all those waves hitting their beach, from these unpredictable angles, took the site down and trading, and they have to face class action lawsuits and all that stuff. So there is a growing understanding of the severity of the problem, even in the survey itself. When we ask folks, what is more important to you, speed of innovation versus reliability and stability, more than 70% of folks said they are more focused on the reliability and the stability of the software as a priority for them compared to, just crank out the ship things quickly, get it out there. Because I think one of the, positive and negative things that came out of the whole CI/CD revolution is you can push code out much more quickly. But then it's out there in the wild, and it's very hard to essentially pull that toothpaste back in once things go wrong. So there's a growing understanding of that within the industry that yes, now we have the power with a click of a button to ship new code out there, spin it out into our Kubernetes container, push it into AWS, to multiple clouds, get it up and running. But the way we're actually testing and verifying the software hasn't dramatically changed in the last 10, 15 years since test-driven development was hit the market. So there's a growing realization of that within the industry, and I think it's going to be a big trend as I'm looking into the results. One more thing that I actually think would be interesting to you and to the readers as well, let me just pull that statistic out there. When we ask folks, which of the following tools and techniques will your company be using by the end of 2020, right? So pipeline automation, so CI, and then microservices and containers, CD, 57%, 45%. So no big surprise there. CI/CD still moving ahead full speed. Number 3, number 4 blew me out of the water. I was not ready for this. I was 100% sure you're going to hear things like observability or site reliability engineering, a lot of the chaos engineering, a lot of those cool buzzwords. Number 3 and number 4 are static code analysis, 37%, and dynamic code analysis, 27%. People understand that it's all about the code.
Does my heart good.
Yeah. If we can push out code super quickly and scale up, but it breaks, nobody cares, especially in the time that we live in, that software. Who would think that, your grandma, your mother, will be Zooming with her doctor, right? 3 months ago.
I just had this conversation on my last interview. Until you've sat with some 70-year-olds and tried to teach them how to mute when they're not talking on Zoom, it's not a lot of fun. But it's more than just what I like about what you're saying, Tal, is that for a long time, I've preached that we need to make security synonymous with quality.
Yeah, for sure.
And you just mentioned dynamic and static code analysis, which are kind of like AppSec, right? Those are security kind of scans, but you didn't mention the security word. You used better quality code, right? Which is where the DevSecOps crowd, this is what we've been preaching now for 4 or 5 years. Security is synonymous with quality. And this is exactly the point.
That is so true. That is so true. I think, I think that over time, you're going to see a convergence of security, reliability, and performance of code converging together. Because if you look at hackers, the best way to attack an application today It's just find a bad piece of code that was written by a developer, wasn't properly tested, and manipulate that versus trying to break through the firewall, right? It's find those code level vulnerabilities. So there's going to be, we see the same level of care that people have been putting towards security now into the quality of the software, just because of the ability. With great power comes great responsibility. Every developer can just push code into production with the click of a button. That's great. But if I told you, every automotive, going back to that example, every automotive engineer can push a new car into the dealership with the click of a button, you'd be like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. But it's coming. Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's, I saw it was a presentation by John Willis and Damon Edwards at one of the DevOps Enterprise Summits a couple years ago. And it was speed, quality, and security. You can't have all three. Right. And that was kind of the promise of DevOps, right? Is that as counterintuitive as it may sound, if we could go faster and automate more, we'll actually have better quality and security, right? By going faster and automating more. Now, we don't always live up to that, as you know well, right? But I think that's the goal we should be shooting for.
I think 100%, and I think one thing that we're probably going to be seeing, even talking about again, the crisis that we're in, if we look at like 2008, how the industrial sector kind of responded to that, a lot of automation was put in, like robotic manufacturing. A lot of that was put in as a result of that crisis. And I have an inkling we're going to be seeing some of that even here, where folks are going to be redirecting some investments and, working within the constraints to see how they can automate things better. And that's why I also think we're going to be moving from CI, which is like, get your Jenkins pipeline in place, which was like 5 or 6 years ago, was like all the rage, to CD, get your container microservice Kubernetes strategy like in place last 2 or 3 years. I think we're going to move, I call it CR, continuous reliability, moving from CI to CD to CR, to making sure that the code that you're pushing out is always, you can push it out faster, you can innovate, but not at the cost of the reliability, the quality, and the security of it. So I think the next big frontier, and where the opportunity, where the risks, and where the need lies, is really around that whole quality umbrella. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of focus. If I'm just kind of, as I said, looking at the information here and doing this for the past 2 or 3 years, when I saw static code analysis, the third thing that people are going to be investing in after CI/CD this year, I'm like, okay, there's some groundswell here. Things are changing.
No, they absolutely are. It's funny. I mean, Checkmarx was the company I interviewed last. And of course, they do static and dynamic code. And they also just did a survey of, not of developers, of consumers, trying to see how important application security and AppSec is to consumers. And many of these consumers tell, let's face it, they probably never heard the term application security, right? They know cyber. But look, for the first time in a long time, the arrows are pointing up, that we are going to move. You called it RD, right? From CI to CD to RD? CR, excuse me. Right. I'm sorry. But I I hope so. I hope that's the way we're moving. I also think that this whole COVID thing and what it's forcing people to relook at how we develop software, how we deploy software, how we use software, what software we really depend on, right? You talk about mission critical kind of stuff. I think that's kind of changing, and I wouldn't be surprised if it had a play in this survey as well, right? I think people look at this stuff differently now.
I think, I keep going back to this because it's just a fundamental shift. Talking to my 70-something-year-old parents, and they're ordering food online on their phone. If you told me they'd be doing that 3 months ago, I'd be like, no, this is for millennials.
Right.
So software has become, it moved from software is eating the world, I think, to kind of code is eating software. Every bug, people are relying on software today to get their groceries, to get their food. We're talking about like elderly people getting their food through their phone. So I think the whole relationship that we as a society have had and will be having with software is going to be.
It's fundamentally shifted. Yeah, I agree, man. And I think that's what really comes out in this survey as well. Tal, I told you the time goes quick, man. We're about out of time. I apologize.
That's
but
great.
You know what? No problem. Great survey, man. Overops, overops.com, and then blog.overops.com, right?
True.
Get more info?
Uh-huh.
All right. Guys, check that out. But for now, this is Alan Schimmel, TechStrong TV with Tal Weiss, CTO of Overops. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
For our Something from the Archive, Something Old interview today, we went back to our DevOps Experience virtual event from last fall. And I picked Gary Groover. For those of you not familiar, Gary, of course, has written several books, my favorite of which is Leading the Transformation. Gary was also the leader behind the digital transformation at HP Computers, Macy's.com. He's an analyst with the Accelerated Strategies Group, pretty, in-demand speaker on DevOps around the world, and my friend. So let's see what Gary had to say back at DevOps Experience last fall, and this is Engineering the Digital Transformation.
Software is becoming more and more critical to how a broad range of businesses compete. Google, Amazon, and others are becoming more efficient and more effective at delivering software than anybody ever thought possible. The challenge is there's a large breadth of software being created to make businesses successful that's not nearly as productive and effective as some of these leading edge companies are at developing software. This is similar to what happened in the automobile industry in the 70s and 80s. Toyota started developing automobiles with better quality, more efficiently and more effectively than anybody thought possible. And it put a lot of pressure on the US-based automobile industry. And they started trying to figure out what they needed to do to become more competitive. They started trying to copy the different processes that companies were using, and they started benchmarking what the leading edge companies in the industries were doing so they could copy those processes. And they spent a long period of time doing that, but really weren't able to catch up. And in fact, Toyota would let any competitor come in and benchmark them because they knew their key to success was not how they were running things today, but it was their culture of continuous improvement, and it was their structured approach to driving continuous improvement that drove their competitive advantage. And eventually the US companies started to figure that out, and they started trying to come up with a structured approach that they could use for driving continuous improvement in their organizations, and captured that in the Lean Six Sigma approach, which was a way to engage everybody in the organization in the continuous improvement journey with a very structured approach that could be taught to people for analyzing specific challenges and going after those. It feels like the software industry is at a similar point. We keep trying to copy the Agile or DevOps practices that we think work best. We try to benchmark and understand what leading edge companies are doing so that we should do those exact same things. And I think what the automobile industry discovered is it's more than just trying to copy those processes and replicate what you've seen in other places. It's understanding your unique challenges, it's understanding your unique issues, and coming up with a very structured approach. And manufacturing has a great track record of driving improvements in this area. There are some key leaders that started setting up the foundations for this. Edwards Demings went to Japan after World War II and drove a focus on manufacturing and quality that took Japan from being known for low quality, low cost products to being a leader in manufacturing known for extremely high quality. Goldratt focused in on theories of constraints and trying to optimize flow through organizations, and manufacturing companies that implemented his approach saw a 70% increase in capacity on average. Do you think your business could think of things to do with a 70% increase in capacity if they were able to get it out of their software organizations? And Toyota, with the Kata process, came up with a very systematic approach to driving continuous improvement in the organizations that enabled significant breakthroughs. Having been somebody who grew up as a process engineer in manufacturing and was focused on continuous improvement most of my life, when I got into software, I realized software was a different beast. And what I hear a lot of people saying is what we really need to do in software is just copy what was done in manufacturing. And having lived in both places and driven continuous improvement in large organizations in both manufacturing and now in software, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think software is a very different beast. We've got to understand its unique characteristics and capabilities. We can learn from what they did in manufacturing, but if we don't adjust our systematic approaches for software to address those unique characteristics and capabilities, we're not going to be nearly as effective at driving improvements. When you look at software versus manufacturing, in manufacturing, it's really hard to build a prototype. You've got to put everything together, you've got to mass assemble it, and so what they tend to do is they tend to only have few integration points. There's some manufacturing companies that have gotten much more nimble and do more integration points, but it's still a designed integration point where you go through a phase or a checkpoint. In manufacturing, it's called a stage gate R&D process for product development. When we copied that over into software, we called it the software development lifecycle, but was really based off of this different perspective. And what you've got to realize in software is we can start building our prototypes from the very first line of code. It's not hard and expensive. We can continue to integrate this code on an ongoing basis. And in fact, that process that we use to manufacture the prototypes and the product on an ongoing basis defines the productivity of our process, our ability to create an environment, our ability to build the code, our ability to deploy the code, and our ability to test it and make sure that it's ready for release or going into the next use is something that we can do multiple times a day on an ongoing basis. We don't have to wait for these different stages, which is very different than it is for manufacturing. The other thing that happens in manufacturing is we're trying to build the same thing over and over again on an ongoing basis. And there's a real focus on the process because the process makes the product. And so all the focus on quality and throughput is trying to fine-tune and make the process. And what's different with software is it's individual people that are crafting the product, and the product changes every time we do a build deploy cycle. So it's very different than process control. We want to really be able to make sure our processes is changing at the rate of the product. And in manufacturing, it's very easy to see the process. You can walk out online, you can see where inventory is building up, you can see when two parts don't go together. And in software, one of our biggest challenges is when we go out to look at the software factory or the manufacturing process, it typically looks much more like this. Maybe we have status update meetings, maybe we have something else, but typically our view of the software development process is not very visible, and it's hard to tell what's going on. And if we're going to get the organization to engage in continuous improvement and make this work, we really need to start by making our manufacturing process visible. And it depends on the type of architecture you have. It depends on the type of application you have. Do you own deployment? Do you not own deployment? Are you doing embedded? The very simple view of our manufacturing line is a deployment pipeline. An example here for a loosely coupled deployment pipeline can be fairly straightforward and easy. You have developers that are working on an application or business idea. You've got a test environment that they can put their code together and integrate and make sure it works well together with. And then you have going into production. And in this case, where you own deployment, you can really be able to do canary releases, you can A/B testing, you can do those different types of things, but not everybody gets to work in this type of environment. And this is the recommendation, and a lot of what you hear coming out of DevOps is the people that are deploying most frequently and being most successful are those that have loosely coupled deployment pipelines. And when you think about it and you step back from this, that seems fairly obvious, because if you can coordinate and work across with 5 people, you're obviously going to be much more effective than if you're working across larger, broader groups of people. Show me 500 people that have to work together, coordinate to deliver software, and I'll show you levels of inefficiencies you haven't ever imagined. And the current thinking in the DevOps community, now that they've tested and said most of the people that do DevOps well have loosely coupled pipelines, is that everybody should re-architecture. And having done that for 10 million lines of code with 800 developers around the world, it's not something that I recommend lightly. If you can do it and you can get it re-architected and roll it out, you are clearly going to be more successful than you are if you're trying to coordinate work across larger groups. But the reality for most organizations is that a very complex thing. And my personal opinion is there's a lot of things in the DevOps space that we can be doing and applying to these large, tightly coupled systems. And in this situation with a loosely coupled system, what you're trying to do is integrate the code together on a frequent basis in the test environment and get feedback from the production. And you do that with continuous integration and the deployments into production. That changes a little bit if you have a large, tightly coupled system like this, because you can't necessarily build it frequently enough. You have too many developers working on any one time to do a continuous integration process that would localize the change and the defect to a few developers. And when we get in this type of situation, what we really need to be doing is we need to be breaking this into smaller subsystems. We can use service virtualization to enable us to test these components independently before we integrate them. And then we can build these into subsystems, and we can build stable subsystems and use quality gates to build them up into the broader pieces of the organization. And when you look at what does the manufacturing process look like for one of these large, tightly coupled systems, it starts to look more like this, where you've got all your subsystems going together, integrating forward and going into different things. The other step that we need to do is a lot of times organizations can't get code through here as quick and frequently as the business would like. And in those cases, they tend to duplicate their manufacturing process by creating a bunch of release branches. And this is another view of our manufacturing process that we need to make very visible, because every time we create one of these release branches and this extra work, we're needing more environments. We've basically duplicated our manufacturing process, and we need to understand how that works. This is for a large tightly coupled system, which is very different than a loosely coupled systems. You have different types of applications. If you have embedded software, you've got to figure out how to develop and qualify stuff on a simulator. Then if you've got custom hardware, you've got to test that and make sure it works on an emulator. And finally on a product, and in a lot of these cases you don't own deployment, the types of things that you would do to remove waste and inefficiencies of the product are very different for tightly coupled systems versus loosely coupled systems. The common theme that I think is across all of these, once we understand what the deployment pipeline is, we really need to look at how do we build in quality. Manufacturing learned a long time ago and has a real focus on building in quality. on an ongoing basis. That's what they focus on and that's what they work on. And because it's the process that's creating the product for them, they spend a lot of their time controlling the process. And they put control limits on it. They use statistical analysis because they're trying to build the same product over and over again on an ongoing basis. And if the process goes out of control, they stop the process and fix the process, because they know if they don't, they're going to end up with a lot of bad quality that they're going to have to rework and fix. And they learned early on that to improve the flow, they've got to build in quality from the beginning. For software, that's different because it's not the process that's creating the product. It's individual developers that are writing code on an ongoing basis. And the way we work at getting better for them is we want to provide them ongoing feedback as quick as we possibly can, as frequently as we possibly can. And one of the ways we do that is we try to gate their code. So when we give them feedback, what we want to do is, in a lot of cases in manufacturing with the and-on chord, they stop the line because they want to stop the process and make sure it doesn't create a more defective product. In software, we don't need to do that because it's really the bad code that we want to stop, and we want to give that feedback to the developer who's written that code so they can fix it and get it resolved while they're working on the code. We can do that with gated commits, which enables us to make sure that if the test doesn't pass, the code doesn't make it into production. And we start to build in quality by having this gated commits and putting quality gates across the system to try to figure out how to build in quality from the beginning. And then what you'll find is, I call them the build acceptance test. This is a minimal level of quality that you'll allow to move forward in your deployment pipeline. And you define that with your quality gates and your build acceptance test. And what you'll find when you have a lot of automated testing is you can't run all those tests fast enough, quick enough to get the feedback that you need. And in that case, you need to still run your regression test, but you need to put those results. So take the latest green build that you have each day, run a full set of regression overnight on it, put those results in a database, and start to create what I call product control charts. And this shows you the stability of your system on an ongoing basis. And then any holes that you see in this process, like for example here, where you've got, test label 1 had a significant drop in passing rates between this build. There is something, a defect made it through my build acceptance test. What I can do is figure out one of these tests that captured it after I fix the defect. Then I can add one of these tests to my gates, and I can use my gates to build in quality, and I use my quality control charts to figure out where there's holes in my system. So this enables us to build in quality and gets us to start thinking about flow. How does flow work through the organization? Goldrat did a very good job of defining flow. How much can you get through a manufacturing facility? How do you focus on that? And he did that with his theory of constraints approach. And how well we can get code through our organizations and how quickly and efficiently really defines the productivity of our software development processes. So there's some ideas that we can leverage off of what Goldrat put in place. He starts by, theory of constraints has 5 focusing steps. Identify a system constraint in the system. This is a manufacturing step that has the slowest cycle time. And when you figure out the one that has the slowest cycle time, what we want to do is focus on that as a constraint and figure out how do we optimize that. Maybe instead of having every material go through that step, if that's a constraint, we can see if we can get some of it manufactured on a different piece of equipment somewhere else. Is there things that we can do to improve the productivity of that constraint? It's this whole focus on understanding where the bottleneck to flow is in your organization and working on it, elevating that constraint and continuing iterating through that until you understand how the constraint moves and goes in different places in the organization. And for manufacturing, you can typically see places where inventory starts to stack up in areas like this, and you can say, that's potentially a constraint. Software is very different that way with the manufacturing process of create an environment, build the code, deploy the code, and run the test, because in manufacturing, we're doing one product or one batch of products per cycle time. In software, we take however many lines of code turmoil are checked in, and we can run the manufacturing process. It takes the same amount of time and costs the same amount for one line of code versus 100,000 lines of code. So traditionally, that's forced us to batch up inventory. But as we get better at automation, we can go to smaller batches, which helps it become more efficient. So theoretically, there's not a constraint like there is in manufacture for the manufacturing of software. That's not to say there isn't a constraint, it just doesn't typically exist in the manufacturing process. When we're looking at software, we need to look across the deployment pipeline and think about where the bottleneck can be. Is it the ability to create business ideas? Is it the developer being productive? Is it this manufacturing process of create, environment, build, test, deploy, or is it triage and defect fixing? And the manufacturing process doesn't have a natural bottleneck, but if your create, environment, build, deploy, test is all very manual, that's probably going to be the biggest thing that's slowing down your ability to deploy on a more frequent basis. As we roll out DevOps and we start to automate a lot of those things, what we find is the bottleneck tends to move over to triage and defect fixing. And what we tend to do there is once we've automated our manufacturing process, we can go to much smaller batch sizes because that's automated and we can run it more frequently. That enables that triage and defect fixing to be more efficient. And if we're not careful, it rolls into operations with monitoring. And what the Google SRE book says, and if you haven't read it yet, you should if you're in this space, is the way we control that is we can let this deployment pipeline flow as efficiently and quickly as we possibly can, as long as production's meeting its service level agreements in terms of uptime and reliability. As soon as that goes down, you put a clamp on the functional changes that are going in that, and the team and everybody has to focus on getting that more stable. So those are the types of things that you do to make sure that operations doesn't become the bottleneck. Ideally, you want to solve all the things with automation and DevOps in the create, build, deploy. You want to move it to triage and defect fixing and then make that as efficient as you possibly can with defect fixing. And then the bottleneck either moves to the business idea or the developer. In my experience, if it's on a business ideas for an extended period of time, in large organizations, you're probably going to end up downsizing. The more appropriate place for me is really placing that constraint on the developer and trying to optimize things that way. So what we want to be doing is focusing on all the different pieces so that we can get the constraint on the developer, and then we need to focus on the things to make them as productive as we possibly can. There's another difference with trying to optimize flow in software organizations that we need to be aware of, and that is in manufacturing, it's really easy to measure flow. You're creating the same process over and over again with no variability. You can count the number of units going down the line. You can count the per minute, per hour, per day. And in software, measuring flow is very hard. Every time you manufacture something, it's a different size, it's a different shape, it's a different color. And when we make a change to the process to try to improve flow, we can't really tell whether it's changed or not. This is why when I first started consulting, go out in organizations, I really coached executives to go out in the organization and get a qualitative feel for what was getting better and what was getting in the way, because I knew it was so hard to measure flow. What I realized after a bunch of years of consulting is, while that worked for me at HP and that was my personal approach, it's hard to get other people in different organizations to do that. I've also seen the value of really good metrics in large organizations to drive the cultural changes that we need. So I'm changing my views and approach to this and realizing that, you know, we need some good metrics to drive these changes and make them happen. And what I've realized is, while it's hard to measure flow, I think I've gotten reasonably good at measuring the resistance to flow or the waste that's slowing flow down. One of the biggest things that I start to look at is I look at the cycle time. How long does it take to go from a check-in happening to going in production? And then on top of that, I plot, you know, how long does it take, and then where are my defects found? And in this case, if I'm finding 60% of my defects 4 weeks after the developers are checked in code, we can't really expect them to get any better. One of the things that we do to make this more efficient and remove waste and improve flow is either get the code to flow through here quicker, so we're finding these quicker, or try to find more defects and get them fixed as close to the source as we possibly can. This makes it easier to triage things with a localized team, and it keeps these environments more stable. The next thing that we can look at that's slowing down flow and working on it is looking at the types of things that are causing us to waste time and energy. Anytime I've got to debug a test issue, an environment issue, a deployment issue, or data issue, that's not the goal of what I'm trying to do. Those things can be automated. They can be fixed once and for all. We should put in processes to automate those and fix them, and then we should be able to show the impact that it has and get this waste and inefficiency out of the organization. And then that enables us to have really good flow with good quality gates. Now, as we're doing this, the one thing we've got to be careful about is as we put in quality gates and we try to find things at their source as best as possible, that we don't drive those gates so high that it slows down flow. So the counteractive to this metric of looking at delay and feedback and those types of things is we really want to look at where inventory is building up in the system. Manufacturing learned a long time ago that inventory is a risk. It should be seen that way. In software, we need to make ours visible. And I think we can do that by showing the lines of code of turmoil that haven't made it to the next stage in the deployment pipeline. And this is the way that we start to measure and understand flow. This is the type of engineering rigor that I think we need to start applying to how we improve software development processes. We need to understand and make our processes visible. We need to work to start building in quality and going into that in much more detail. And we need to focus and measure and understand flow. And while we can't actually measure flow, we can measure the resistance to flow. And we need to work on those things to drive continuous improvement into the process. And as a software industry, we are engineers. We can figure out how to apply this systematic approach. And if we're going to engage the broader organization in driving continuous improvement like they have in the manufacturing industry, we're going to need this systematic approach that has a common view of how to go do this so people can engage and work together and agree on the priorities. This has been a very short review of my new book, Engineering the Digital Transformation. There's a lot more detail in that. The first 10 people that go to my website and go to the ebook and enter DEO as a code get a free book, and if you want my slides, send it to slides@groover.info. If you have questions, send me an email. I appreciate your time, and I encourage you to go off and start analyzing your processes and starting on a journey of continuous improvement in how you develop and deliver software.
Thanks very much to Gary for doing that presentation at DevOps Experience, and I hope you enjoyed it here today. For the news, it's time for the news. As usual, we'll take a look at the headlines at the Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, and Container Journal. Again, not inclusive. Please go check out the sites for so much more. But let's look at what some of the headlines are. On DevOps.com, we've got, who's responsible for security? Apparently, it depends. Well, that's an old story. And sorry to say it hasn't really changed, but maybe it's not a bad thing that it hasn't changed. It really does depend. So have a look at that one. Other headlines on DevOps.com today is Harness to reduce cloud costs. The folks at Harness.io really making some hay and some progress over the last couple of weeks and months. Canuta updates BPM platform. And then survey surfaces software development issues. Well, might be a little Captain Obvious there, but go check out the article. Over on Container Journal, we have LoadC open source project. LoadC open source project automates Kubernetes management. Always something going on, it seems, in that Kubernetes ecosystem. Then we have LNF adds paths to build CNs. I think we've covered that one before. And then on Security Boulevard, identity theft and fraud is growing at an unprecedented rate in 2020. I could personally vouch for this. I've seen it on my own personal accounts. Not sure what the answer is. I mean, I've taken some pretty drastic steps around my digital identity and financial information, passwords and everything else, and two-factor and just whatever you can think of. But have a look at the article. And then also challenges of a new CISO the first year. This is a really good article, and I think you're going to enjoy it. You know, that first year for the CISO, a new CISO, is really kind of a honeymoon period. They come in with a mandate, they're setting up the program, and I find it's usually around that 9-month to 12-month period where it starts getting a little old and people are questioning what you're doing. So have a look at the article. Guys, as I say, this is not meant to be inclusive. There's so many more good articles on Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, Container Journal. Go check them out. Also, while you're there, please, last chance, go register for TechStrongCon.com. It's the best virtual event I think you may see this year, and certainly at a free admission, you can't beat the price. So register, check it out. We have 50 great speakers going on. Alrighty, that's the news for today. That means it's now time to turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with Nico Fischbach, who is the CTO, global CTO at ForcePoint. Hi Nico, how are you? So glad to see you.
Good to meet you too. Thank you. Glad to be here. You know, it's been a few busy weeks being on Zoom calls. So let's do another type of interview for a change.
Exactly. Even though it's still on Zoom, but at least it's hopefully a little more exciting than a company meeting. So
it will be. I'm sure it will be.
Great. So I've been hearing a little bit about. I've been hearing a lot about the activities of hackers during the COVID-19 pandemic, and just the ranging from the fact that first of all they're still very much doing their job, if you will, doing their business during the pandemic, and almost to the point where certain organizations might not actually notice a difference in their hacking activity during this pandemic. But one of the things that your company has kind of been taking a look at is this concept of delayed hacking. So I wonder if we can kind of talk about that a little bit. Tell me, what are some of the security issues, obviously, related to delayed hacking, and what do companies need to be mindful of? So can you first kind of explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you. What we mean by that is that the bad guys, not just the hackers or the criminal gangs or the nation states, are using the opportunity of constant change and the noise that came with it to fly below the radar, put their pivot points, their implants, compromising their accounts, but not actually concluding the attack, right? Basically saying that let's like a chess game, let's make some moves, but prepare for the final move, but not make the final move yet, right? Because maybe they have not reached their target yet, and they're just positioning the various pieces on the chessboard to make it happen. That's kind of delayed hacking. So it is a form of reconnaissance to make sure they actually understand the environment much better, and also putting the right monitoring in place, comprising the right accounts to get more visibility and actually prepare for the real action. Basically, it's a long game.
I'm sorry. So is this something that's become more prevalent in the these current times where organizations are basically completely just distributed at this point?
We believe so, right? Because the bad guys will always use the opportunity either to surf on a theme, when trying to compromise somebody. So you look at the social engineering techniques right now that relate more to the COVID and the COVID theme. Obviously, the fact that companies are adopting new SaaS applications, so you see spam and phishing emails that are maybe closer to Microsoft 365 updates. They kind of follow the trend to, be part of that normal corporate messaging and, either compromise the users or do something else. And we also see the data. So the peaks we saw in terms of the email channel, in terms of tentatives of phishing, clearly has bumped, where we saw like some days more than 1 million, 1.5 million very specific emails targeting those organizations. I think that's when they try to attack the human in the past. But at the same time, the CIOs and the CISOs in the early days of the work from home at scale had to re-architect the environment very, very quickly to scale up VPN access, to move data and applications out of the data center to the cloud. And all that change kind of happened overnight, where it was driven by the need for the company to continue to operate. So, bypassing change management, bypassing audits, bypassing pen testing, probably not doing the right qualification in terms of data protection. The bad guys, I mean, that's gold for them, right? So it's, right. All those things they can, just make sure they actually become the needle in the haystack for real, because this haystack just became so big kind of overnight.
Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, then, with the fact that corporate networks now seem very porous because of the fact that everybody's working from home and there really is no network edge anymore, it seems to me that this would actually be ripe for a full-on attack rather than a delayed attack. So why do you think they're taking this tack rather than, as I said, that kind of full-scale attack that would seem to me would, the time would be right if any time now would be it.
I think there's two things, right? To the first point, clearly the network edge is gone. What people used to call the old school perimeter being the physical walls, this is gone. I mean, what we say at Forcepoint is people have become the new perimeter. And actually, it's not just the people, it's the people in their home office have become the new perimeter. So it's not just being porous, it's completely distributed. And, some families are probably even sharing, obviously, people are sharing their Wi-Fi at home and their, 4G, 5G connections, but they're also sharing their equipment in some cases, right? So this is kind of the new spread. To the second part of your question, I think, there's so many targets right now. I think they probably see that, for some of the attackers, there's the short-term benefit of actually in the action now. But that's kind of more probably the guys that are after, ransomwares, crypto lockers, and so on, because they didn't change their tactics. What we really think is those delayed attacks are more the very well organized criminal gangs or nation states, right? Because they are in for the long game. They don't care if they need to trigger now. They can trigger in 6 months, 1 year. The fact is, you want to have this forward presence in the organization, right? If it makes sense for them to trigger now, they will trigger now. But, for those more large scale, long run games, I'm sure, they want to wait, because there's so much more to learn about the organization, the way the organization operates, the business processes, the key people, who are the VIPs they want to attack, where's the data moving? Maybe they haven't kind of broken far enough yet in the organization to actually hit the data they want to hit. Right, so they're waiting for that opportunity for someone to maybe open that lock, physically, or that safe, and then jump in, right? Because they cannot break the safe themselves, right? So, probably different tactics depending on who's in the game, but clearly a clear differentiation between the daily noise from crypto lockers, ransomware, and drive-by phishing, versus on the other side of the spectrum, very well organized organizations, including nation states.
Okay. All right. So their end game isn't necessarily money per se. Then it's not like go and hit them hard, get the money and get out. It's more maybe intellectual property or something that is maybe so much more valuable at the end of the day to an organization, or to even just have that connection to a larger system that is going to create or give them even a greater payload. Okay, all right, that makes total sense.
Exactly. I mean, who cares about a few bitcoins or any crypto money, right? Or trying to get another 50 grand from this poor local, state or city. I think the idea that you look at is, really, like you said, intellectual property, espionage, watching contracts, watching commercial conversations in big groups. Tracking the right people because of their connections. It's a different mindset. It's really probably more like the espionage angle, or really stealing valuable company data, or business processes that they want to repeat or take out. Some of it might be also trying to trigger disruption. Think of to break the integrity of a process of a company. But again, why do it now? Everybody's I'm not going to say every company is kind of a little bit broken now because of the situation, but they probably want to jump in at the right point in time to have an even bigger impact.
Sure. Okay. Well, makes a lot of sense. So what can organizations do? I mean, are there certain things that they can look out for on their network, or maybe certain, I don't know, hints that something might be amiss?
Yeah, I think so. I think they should do two things. I mean, many companies and many CISOs quite often look at infrastructure security. The security hygiene element of it, and this one is still very important because of all the changes that have might occurred at that kind of level or platform level, right? So I think this one, all those kind of internal audits, red team or red teaming or pen testing, they need to have a look at it, make sure they enable their SOC analysts to do the right searches, and try to find that needle in the haystack. But we know that the dwell time is quite long. But we're also suggesting, if you look at the sort of force point lens when it comes to data protection and understanding human behavior, that's the other kind of lens or vantage point we want to recommend CISOs look at. First of all, at the end of the day, like you said, they want to try to exfil data because that's where the value is. Data has become the new gold, if you will. So they're going to go after that. So make sure that you have the right data protection mechanism in place from understanding where your data is in this brave new world, because a lot of it has shifted to the cloud and it's been moving around now. A lot of data also has moved home, and that's something that comes up a lot right now because, the company's laptop or even the desktops that people use at home hold much more company data than they used to in the past because of work from home. And then, once you know where the data is, try to classify it, try to protect it to avoid the data exfil. And the other thing that we believe is quite important, first point is like understanding the interaction users have with company data. That's why we call this behavior analytics, right? Because we all have our daily routine, and there are ways to really quickly detect, thanks to analytics, machine learning, if your behavior changes, which quite often means you've been compromised. In most of the cases, people don't go rogue. It happens sometimes. That's the typical insider threat or the espionage case. In most of the cases, somebody is just abusing you to make you a pivot inside the organization where, Nico is not behaving like yesterday's Nico. What has changed? Why am I using different programs? Why I'm trying to touch data I shouldn't be touching? Why I'm trying to move data that I never move? And actually I'm trying to move it over USB, it's blocked, it's being cached over the DLP channel on email, so I'm trying something else. That's not my normal behavior, right? So basically, summary is, make sure you have your infrastructure security in hand, but really focus on data protection and then overlaying behavior analytics on top of that to really understand all those interactions and those data movements.
Interesting. So do you think that we'll see continued prevalence of the delayed hacking as we go on, or do you think that it's something that's maybe kind of a one-time deal during the pandemic, and then we'll see kind of more of a drop-off after things get quote unquote back to normal?
I think so. I think there's, it's opportunity driven, right? The opportunity is now. So, people kind of rush in, the door is open, it's a big wave. Let's try to hide in the wave, right? I think when we, and I think we already, I think, most of the companies are nearly back to normal IT and security operations. There are people are still working from home for many of them, or, have, invoked business continuity or disaster recovery. But I think, in the last few weeks, CISOs, data protection officers, CIOs, I think have regained control over the environment, right? So as much as they probably struggled the 4, 6, 8 first weeks, I think in most countries we are at like week 12, week 13, week 14. Since the start of the lockdowns, I think what I've heard from talking to quite a few CISOs, every week, I think they have regained control over their assets, and they are clearly accelerating a number of their data protection programs. And we just did a study, I think that we published yesterday or the day before, around key data from CIOs and CEOs in terms of their focus, and clearly behavior analytics has become top of mind. they understand that this kind of black and white security where you either block or allow is not enough anymore, and that you need much more flexibility and what we call kind of risk adaptive protection to make sure data can be secured while in motion, and having users kind of everywhere.
Interesting. Well, I tell you, we hear about certain things such as the delayed hacking techniques, but I guess it's times like these when not only do we see the best in people, but we also see the worst. So, thanks very much for your insight, Nico. It's a great conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Okay, thanks very much, Charlene. Well, the way TechStrong TV flows, when Charlene finishes, Mitch begins. So we go into our analyst corner with Mitchell Ashley, CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I'm joined by Jim Rose, who is CEO of Circle CI, and we're talking about continuous integration, continuous deployment, but also what's happening in our environment and how software has become so much more, even more increasingly strategic to businesses, and new pressures that are happening around getting code out in the field in production so we can help our businesses through recovery as well as growth. So welcome, Jim. Good to be talking with you.
Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. So tell us a little bit about the company. If there's somebody on the planet that doesn't know who you are, I think most folks do, but there may be somebody who would love to hear more.
Yeah, well, we are a continuous integration and continuous deployment platform. So we've been around for almost 9 years at this point. When we started out, we did CI/CD predominantly on a multi-tenant cloud instance. And now we can do both the multi-tenant cloud as well as do installed software and on-prem software, but really focused on the problem between the time you have an upstream change that you need to test and validate before you put into the data center into the hands of your customers. And so we try and automate all of those steps that happen in between those two moments.
Great place to be in the market. Probably explains also why you've been around as long as you have. That tends to be the first starting point, or often is, for people getting into DevOps and automation and doing continuous software, right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm sure. I know you've talked a little bit about your business and how it's impacted by COVID, and I don't know how remote worker friendly you are. Most of us are these days. If you started a company in the last 5 or 10 years. What do you see happening in market, though? I mean, what are folks thinking about recovery, role software plays in that, new pressures that are coming on IT and product development teams at your customers?
Yeah, well, I mean, when everything happened with COVID, we do have a remote organization. So even in the normal times, we are more than 50% remote. So it has been a much easier transition for us. But when everything went down and things got very uncertain in the market, our assumption was you would actually see a fairly dramatic drop in activity across software development in general as people tried to make the adjustment to being remote. And what we ended up seeing was a pretty large uptick in productivity and a pretty large uptick in activity on the platform as developers kind of came into their own house and they had to work through new strategies and how to work together remotely and remote only. So what we've seen is, in the past, if you went into a big company, continuous delivery might be a glint in their eye. It might be project number 6 or 7 on their list, and they get 2 done or maybe 3 done a year. So it's been something that people have talked about for 5 or 6 years. But now that everyone is out of the office and remote, you no longer have that crutch to lean on when, say, the build breaks and you tap somebody on the shoulder. You're like, do you have any idea what happened? Or you have to restart the box that's underneath somebody's desk. You have to rethink a lot of those kind of manual process patches that everyone has had in place. And so we saw a pretty dramatic uptick, not just in developers developing and writing more code, because I think there's just been a big bout of productivity as people have been unencumbered and not interrupted during the day, but also new companies are coming to the fore, really trying to figure out how to get the baseline foundation of CI/CD in place because they don't have a choice at this point. So it's been an interesting time. You definitely see a lot of new and different companies and different applications building, and it's only accelerating. And so what for us is interesting is, what happens when the economy opens back up? What happens when folks get into the office? Is this a big systemic process change that's going to really stick and last across a number of these companies, or are there going to be situations where they're going to go back into what they were doing before? I don't think anybody knows at this point.
It's so interesting because you look back at past economic crisis, 2008 housing, 9/11. Those were all yes, they're events that happen, but there's so much more of a financial market underpinning to the catastrophe, if you will. And here, setting aside the human tragedy, I don't know if that's appropriate to do, but respectfully in that way. Here, there's so many differences. You think what's changed since just 2008? How much more SaaS is being used as well as being created by companies, moving everything to the cloud? How much more open source there is? Digital transformation, connecting business to IT in a much more, let's say, strategic as well as maybe meaningful, depending on IT to deliver. And now, as companies are trying to determine what do we think a recovery looks like, well, there's no one answer. There's probably 5 scenarios. Which one do we plan for? Which one do we, or a couple do we execute on? It's a whole different dynamic than I think we've experienced.
Yeah, and everyone is approaching it differently, right? I mean, I don't think there's one playbook that everyone is following. There's certainly companies that have had a more remote workforce in place and have had a greater degree in investment in automation prior to all of this occurring, where this has been a fairly seamless transition. And if you're in that bucket, you're very lucky. Whereas for everyone else, it's not just that you don't have a playbook and you didn't have it ready to be implemented yet because it may not have been the thing that you were actually really strategically focused on over the course of this year, is you don't have any time horizon. So, if it were a 2-week disruption or a 4-week disruption, well, then you have a set of strategies that you might employ that maybe are more duct tape and chicken wire to try and get to the other side. Whereas now, we're 60, 70 days into this, depending on which state you are in the US. And, fingers crossed, all of this goes well over the course of the summer. And just from a general global humanity perspective, we end up on the other side of this. And, the damage is done, but we're, getting to the other side. The worst case scenario is we get to the end of this summer and something else happens, right? And then you're kind of right back into the mix. And so we've seen a lot of customers just really struggle with that. Just what are they actually planning for? Are they planning for a long-term process change and a long-term technology and stack change? Are they preparing for something that's more temporary? And no one knows. And so I think it really comes down to the resources you have at your disposal, what kind of time horizons you actually, and what kind of runways you have at your disposal. I mean, we've certainly seen, the really interesting cases have been US and Canadian based retailers.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is the time when you are developing, because you're going to go into code freeze come Halloween and just lock it down so that you can get through all the way into the beginning of January. But is that what we're working towards? Is that what we're doing? And, there's whole industries that just don't know what the cycle is. And so it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
You point out several great things. There's discussions about rolling recoveries up and downs, forward, backward, all that kind of thing. And here we have a health crisis that no one knows. Certainly we don't. I don't know what the outcome or the pattern is going to be. There's kind of no playbook, as you mentioned, to follow. In past economic crises, oftentimes IT organizations are asked to step back and kind of stick to our knitting, to use that expression. Let's make sure the core business is shored up and we're delivering good service, and we'll put things on hold for new products and services until we start to invest more. Now, there's exceptions for some companies that will say, now's the right time to invest more. Not everybody does that. But it seems in this situation, businesses want to be able, because of the high unknowns, want to be able to respond quickly, because now that we have some sense of what path A might look like, let's go after that and execute those plans. We need software now. We need results now. Don't wait.
Yeah. And I think the companies that have the investments in place, that either have the capital to invest or they have the human capital on hand, software developers, IT professionals, and all the various resources, most of those companies are doubling down on their software investment. Mm-hmm. We're looking at this as a time of, this is the time under a little less strain and pressure to really think about how we invest in our systems and invest in our people. And so we think that's part of what's driving the uptick in chunks of the market, where people have this kind of awakening moment in this time when some of the external pressures are lower to make the necessary investments. And so that's really good. I think even for the companies that are under pretty extreme stress and under a lot of duress, we've seen kind of a retraction back to the development core, right? Like usually sales and marketing are the first that get impacted, or your field operations get impacted, and it kind of works its way back into the core. And software engineering and product are typically one of the last groups to get touched. And we've seen that as well. And so we work with a lot of pretty forward-leaning SaaS companies. We work with a lot of folks that are online. And what we have seen is that those companies are doubling down their investment in, how do I make the online channel more efficient? How can I drive more sales with less human intervention? How do I continue to kind of land and expand in those audiences? And so we'll see how that goes, and we'll see how long that lasts. But it's definitely a pattern that we've seen, not just in one or two companies, but we're seeing it in entire sectors of our customers.
Yeah, it seems that doubling down can also show up as let's really commit to a pivot or a shift in strategy, that if we're going to make it, let's make it now. Well, we've got some time, some flexibility. We're not, as you mentioned, the other pressures aren't there. How about folks that haven't really committed yet or aren't very far on their DevOps or retooling journey? What are you seeing happening with folks in that boat? There's always the saying of best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next second best is today, right?
Yeah.
Are those folks able to start to execute more on moving this direction, or is it more stay close to the knitting? Let's wait till we've got some more forward progress in the business.
I think it's where they sit in the org. So we've definitely seen parts of organizations that probably are a little bit further behind that have an opportunity to do a greenfield deploy, right? They could sit and they could wait for kind of the corporate IT practices and the corporate IT processes to catch up to be able to support their project. Or in many cases, they've been given the green light to think about setting up their own tooling stack that exists outside of the core. So we've seen projects or sets of projects that have moved from some of these companies and have moved, not just moved on to new tooling, but in our particular case, have moved in the cloud. So, in the past, you may have had CISOs or others that were blocking the ability to have code sort of outside of the four walls, where that may or may not be an option now. And so we've seen kind of these early movers and these fast movers inside of bigger companies that have started to adopt pretty sophisticated practices and pretty sophisticated tooling. And so that's really exciting. And, what we hope is that, as those teams find success, as those teams, get all the benefits of the DevOps practices that all of us preach all the time, that, not only is that going to stick with those teams, but that's going to be an opportunity, given the fact that so many of these are service-oriented architectures anymore, that their service is touching 4 other services who now have the opportunity to adopt new tooling and new processes, which then gets you to the next layer of the onion out. And so we'll see how that goes, but early signs have been good. And I think the enthusiasm has been really good. I think you have a lot of teams that have wanted to advance and put in new DevOps practices, but for whatever reason have not had the latitude to make that happen. And for many good reasons in a lot of cases. But given the complete change in circumstances, there are fewer hurdles and fewer barriers for them to get over. Mm-hmm. So it's I feel for the CIOs and the CTOs and all the folks that are dealing with, a very long and big and sprawling team with lots of different projects, and now they're all moving at different cadences, and you have to figure out how to create some standardization and some process in a world where you figured you had it locked down for a long time and you had a pretty good roadmap for what you were doing. And a lot of that is like a snow globe and it's gotten shaken up and you're kind of making it up as you go along. So it's an interesting time for sure.
I'm curious, and I know just a little bit about your background because I've heard you talk about the shift, the pivot you had to make. I think it was maybe, was it that Copious was the company where you were using Facebook's APIs? And I remember the time when this happened, where businesses were building off of that feed out of Facebook, and in their infinite wisdom or not, decided we're shutting that off and you don't get to access to it. And I know you made a big pivot to the supplier side, I think, rather than the consumer part
Mm-hmm.
of the business. Are there lessons from that experience that you kind of bring into this situation? You can see how they're applicable today.
Yeah, I mean, so the background on that is we were building a social marketplace application, and we were using the existing social signals from Facebook and Twitter and some of the other social sources to basically try and create a new version of eBay. But we were very exposed to the vicissitudes of the upstream platforms, right? If someone wanted to change their approach or wanted to change their strategy, in the case of Facebook or Twitter or otherwise, they could essentially kind of turn the knobs up and back, which would have a pretty dramatic impact on our business. And so when we think about it at Circle CI, when we think about our business, is we want the flexibility to plug into any change that's upstream as well as any platform that's downstream. So we're not overly exposed to any one particular player, but at the same time, we think that reflects the state of our customers' setups. So you go inside of most customers and almost all of them are multi-cloud. They have multiple data centers. They have multiple locations where their code is coming from. You mentioned before with the rapid adoption of open source, with the rapid externalization of what used to be core custom work into third-party SaaS services, the sources of upstream change have exploded. And so we are trying to position ourselves and basically create kind of a linchpin and a platform where any of those things can both be ingested and tested and ultimately deployed. And so we've invested really heavily in our platform to make it as flexible as possible for our customers, because we don't want our customers to get into that same position. And so we created a framework last year that we call Orbs, which is basically a package manager for delivery. And the reason we did that was like the experience that we had. It's like, how can we ensure that customers have all the tooling that's necessary, because our customers are developers, so that they can build the processes, the platforms, and the flows and the tools to be able to use Circle CI with whatever tool or whatever source that they want to be able to plug into. And so that's a big mantra of ours, is this idea of being open. And the other big piece where we've invested is that we've seen, as customers move faster and faster and faster, as you start to decompose into services and you start deploying those services more and more quickly, that the act of not only testing, but deploying and ensuring that a release is good gets infinitely more complex over time. So, when you had one big monolithic code base and you tested it, and if everything was good and your staging environment or your pre-production environment matched production, you could just lift and shift and put the new version into prod. But now you have folks that have dozens, if not hundreds of services all deploying at different rates, and they're all moving, and you're never really sure what is the exact state of production and like what services roll to what percentage of users. And so we've seen that complexity of delivery just go up and up and up. So we've really gone deep to try and focus on solving that problem for our customers, because we just, with each and every new customer that comes on, as they get to that level of maturity, you're like, wow, boy, that's really complicated. That's a real hornet's nest in there. And so, that's been our approach.
That sounds like a pretty meaty thing to try to solve. I mean, for your customers, how do you approach helping them with their own complexity? You don't want to stand in the way of it and make the problem worse. You want to hopefully at least be neutral, if not helping them with that. What are some strategies you've had to use for that?
So we like to call ourselves opinionated, but not prescriptive. So the platform itself can do anything you want. If you can script it and you can run it in some type of compute, you can run it on CircleCI. And so the platform itself is quite flexible. And we've tried to avoid making very specific technical choices, because everyone wants to build something different, and whatever they're trying to build is the right thing for them. And we're not the one to tell them otherwise. And so we've taken this position of, if you need to build it on CircleCI, we're going to help you orchestrate that process, and you can pick the tools and pick the technologies, environments that you want to use that's right for your particular project. So that's been one kind of big underpinning and one big part of our approach. I think the second part is, and you're absolutely right, everyone's build is different. It's different for a whole multitude of different reasons. Some of them sometimes are good. Some of them sometimes maybe are a little more challenging, but it's right for them. And so what we've tried to do in the platform is basically say, you can make this platform do whatever you want it to do. What we have seen, if you're building, for example, this node-based, web front end, here are the tools that tend to work pretty well together. Here's a process and a templated script that you can use to basically get yourself up and running quickly. If you don't want to use that and you want to use and kind of go a la carte off the menu, no problem with that either. And so we try and help customers along based on what we have seen and what we've seen be successful on the platform. But at the same time, we don't try and close any doors, because one of the really nice things about working with development teams is that they're incredibly creative, and they're finding new and different ways to solve problems as a community well before anybody from a vendor side is actually able to solve those issues. And so kind of closing those doors to the community is a way of kind of stifling creativity. And we like to think in some cases we're leading the charge, in other cases we're trying to fast follow. We have really smart people using the platform, and if they're finding really interesting ways of doing things, we want to figure out, can we encapsulate that? Is that something that could be useful for other folks on the platform? And so it's kind of a push and a pull.
That's an important lesson to learn. I know I've learned it on the product side, is don't assume you know how customers are going to use your product, because they'll find interest, especially if they like your product, they'll find new and very unexpected ways of using it. So best way is to talk to them, right? And find out how they're using it.
And developers are great at telling you what they think, right? Yeah. So that's one of the biggest benefits of working with this community, is that there are definitely times on Twitter and other platforms where things might get a little pointed. But one of the interesting things is if somebody has a comment about the way that the platform works or something that they don't understand, if you just reach out to them and just like, we'd really like to understand what you're trying to do, because we're obviously falling short from a product perspective in addressing your need. Developers lock right in, and they will get on a Zoom. They'll walk you through exactly what's going on, the problem that they're trying to solve. And exactly to your point, like we build a big build platform, but we're not building e-commerce applications. We're not building the next great driverless, autonomous vehicle application. We're not building data science applications. And so all of these communities are doing really new and interesting things that we can learn from. And so, we try and sort of take a step back and say, well, we understand our thing. We understand how to build a really big scalable build platform, but what's really important is what you're actually trying to build, and we can learn a lot more from the community than we can otherwise kind of pass on.
Yeah, the problem isn't negative customer feedback; it's unheard negative customer feedback. Right?
Oh, yeah.
What you don't hear, right?
Yeah.
Let's jump to the build platform. I know on the 27th of May you came out some new releases specifically around this. I think addressing some of the topics you're talking about. Some of it around ease of use and making parts of the platform faster, and creating some packages, some I think you call them convenience images to accelerate that part of it, less setup, those kind of things. So tell us a little bit about some of the things you've just released.
Yeah. So we did 3 big releases. The convenience images one is a really interesting one because that is an example of where we've learned from the community and tried to create bootstraps and templates for other folks coming onto the platform. So when we launched Circle CI, it was well before Docker ever came about. And when we launched what we call 2.0, our second version of the platform, it was really in the very, very early days of Docker. And to be able to set up somebody's environment, they have to pull in all the various layers and all the various images so that they can create their environment and then get to building. And as Docker has matured and as Docker has stabilized, and as we've seen more people build using certain languages with certain types of apps, we have figured out how to take that very long list of images and layers and cram it down into just the stuff you need, just the basic tooling you need. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to get your build running much faster with much fewer resources. So in some cases, we've been able to get kind of that initial setup period down and the initial size of that image down by 70 to 90%. And it just makes your build faster, more deterministic, and just much more reliable and stable. So that's been one big investment. And that's really, again, that's a push and pull between our team and the community. And so we've built those images, they're all open source, and then the community works with us and continues to maintain those. And so that's been a really good relationship on the image side. And that's been an extension of what we were doing around the packaging side. The second big area is, we really believe in being a platform, and we believe in trying to enable customers with their own data and their own information. And so one of the areas that we've been investing in is what we call our Insights API, which is an aggregation of all of your build experience, everything that's going on as you're building software at a pipeline level, at a workflow level, at a job level, and then pushing it all out to the edge so that if you're building your own custom dashboards, you can ingest all of your build information into one place and make good choices. Or if you're using other third-party services as a dashboarding solution or using it to integrate with other data sources, you can do that as well. So we've been continuing to add to this Insights API. And one of the announcements we just put out is we partnered with a company in England called Plandeck, which is built a great platform around engineering productivity and developer productivity. And so they're pulling in the Circle CI build information and using it and combining it with information from your Git providers, information from your issue trackers, so that you can just get better visibility on maybe where some of the rough spots are in your development process, in your operations process, so that you can bring data and figure out ways of being able to solve it. We all solve things anecdotally, and we have a world of data that we can work from. And so that's a really exciting partnership. And it's one that is kind of the initial beacon as to how a lot of that information can be used across a much broader array of customers. And then the last piece is we've had to do a complete refresh of our front-end user experience as well as our front-end technical stack. And that also came from a lot of learning from the community. So what we've learned from our developers is that when they think about CI/CD, they don't want to be thinking about CI/CD unless something breaks, right? Everyone wants your tooling to basically be in the background, doing its job, making sure that everything works. But if something breaks, it basically pops up and hits you in the nose and tells you how to fix it. And so we took a lot of that learning and a lot of that insight from our customers and tried to bake it back into the UI so that the UI is there when you need it, but it's, unobtrusive at other times. And so that's been a really big undertaking for us as well, because again, you've got very opinionated folks and very opinionated customers and lots of great feedback. And so we wanted to make sure if we were going to put this change into the community and into our customers' hands, that we were really thoughtful about how that happened. And so that's been a big project, and one that we're excited to continue to roll out into the community.
It's sometimes that's a bit of that pride as a product owner or designer to say, well, we want to design this so they don't have to use our stuff except when they really need to.
Yeah.
Right? We're the exception, other than setting up a config. Some great things in these announcements. I'm curious. I know also this convenience image idea. Something that I read said that some of those convenience images are just designed for the build process and test, not production. Others are production. Is that a matter of what you include in that image, or are there other purposes or intentions of how you do that?
Yeah, sometimes you need certain tooling in place in the image when you spin it up for a test. Like, for example, I'm trying to think what a good example would be. Like, for example, you need Git tooling in the actual testing image, but you wouldn't need it in the production image. And so it allows you to start to take some of those images and really customize and specialize them for the exact job that you're trying to accomplish. And what's been interesting is that, so the convenience image is designed to be stable and reliable and have just the very, very basic amount of tooling in it. But then, customers fork them, and then they add their own tooling and their own processes inside of their own versions of the image. And so they can continue to basically take that and go with it and run. And so it's been an interesting learning process for us, where, a lot of what we try and do for our customers is we try and get them to that first build as fast as humanly possible. We want our customers to find success very quickly, because most people don't want to sit around and think about the build system. It's not actually what their job is. In most cases, they're trying to develop other software, but the build system is a requirement to get done. And so things like convenience images are an easy way for us to get them started. And then as they continue to work and as they continue to optimize their projects, they can take that base image and continue to tweak it and tune it to make their builds as fast as they need them to be, or as rich as they need them to be, whatever their particular goal is.
It's interesting too, because I can certainly see how you're taking feedback from the community, from your customers, responding to things that they'd like to have in the product or change in the product. But also you can see strategically how it's aligned with increasing the pace of how we create software, getting new capabilities into market, the things that your customers are being asked to do, not just create software, but the conditions under which they're being asked to do that now. And I think we're all assuming that's not going to go away. That's only going to get more so, faster, sooner, better, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to spend every minute that you have at your disposal actually focused on the thing that makes you special and makes your business work. And in most cases, that is actually not going to be the build system. And so, we want to create as many legs up as humanly possible for our customers so that they just don't have to think about it and don't have to worry about it. Now, the ultimate leg up for the majority of customers is to just use the cloud. So, when you use our multi-tenant system, when you use CircleCI.com, our cloud version, you don't even have to think about the underlying compute. You just render it into your config file and it just does its thing, and all the compute is available there for you. So you don't even really have to think about the infrastructure. Now, in a lot of cases for much larger companies with more established DevOps teams, they want to do that internally, and that's fine as well. And so we've tried to meet the customer where they are. And everyone is at a different stage of the journey. And again, we're not the company to presuppose how you should do something. We're there to try and enable you to get to whatever your outcome is. And so whether you're building in the cloud, whether you want to build behind the firewall, whether you want to build half in the cloud, half behind the firewall, what we've really tried to do is be flexible to kind of get you where you are and meet you at the point of the journey where you happen to be. Which makes things complex. Not always easy, but we think ultimately the majority of customers will, especially when you think about testing, it's an activity that's ripe for and really belongs in the cloud, given its spiky nature. And we think that's ultimately where everyone ends up, but it's going to take some time. And so we want to make sure that we can be part of that journey.
And the software teams I've been a part of, I always think of the continuous integration is, and analogies don't always hold up, so apologize if this doesn't, but I kind of think of it as sort of the drive chain, and the CI part of it is the transmission, right? You want to put it in gear and go. You want to hear from it until you need to, right? It's time to do something or pay attention to it. But every team has a different kind of drivetrain. It's, to your point, we're hauling heavy loads, we're speed, we're whatever that is. And that's represents kind of the challenge you're talking about for your company, is how do you provide the platform that can support all the variations of that?
Yeah, when we started almost 9 years ago, the types of applications that built were pretty sophisticated single-page web apps. They were using Ruby, Python, JavaScript, some associated framework, but they didn't compile. If you were building those applications, you needed lots of very small boxes so that you could parallelize very large test suites. But we had sort of one type of compute and one type of container to rule them all. And as we grew, and as the types of work that were being conducted on the platform expanded, we had to really rethink our platform to figure out, well, shoot, it can't be one platform or one container to rule them all. We have to figure out how to allow people to bring whatever it is that they need to our platform and build on our platform. And so that's a lot of what we've worked on over time. And that's a big lift. It's a heavy lift. You get the benefit of scale, and you get the benefit of kind of watching tens of thousands of companies build on the platform. You can get a sense of patterns and kind of build to those patterns. One of the really interesting things for us has been, so we've been freemium since the beginning, where customers, irrespective of where they are in the world, could sign up for free and they could just start building on our platform. And as a result, we've seen very different approaches to DevOps and very different motivations for DevOps, depending on where you are. So the first market we actually launched where we had a dedicated go-to-market team on the ground was in Japan. And Japan has incredibly sophisticated CI/CD practices, whereas in the US, we've always been focused on speed. It's like, how do I get to market faster, right? Move fast and break things has been really a driver for automation, so that you can do that. You can move at that clip. Whereas in Japan, the driver was always quality. I don't want to release anything that's broken, because if I release things that are broken, there's face issues and cultural issues there, and that's not a good thing. And the way that you would solve that is by having great automation. You would push small packages so that you had small change sets that you knew if something broke, you could go ahead and fix it. And you kept the flow going that way. And so in the US, when you adopt CI/CD practices for speed, you get quality as sort of as an afterthought to that, as sort of a second order benefit to that change. Whereas in Japan, you saw quality driving the bus, and everybody was really focused on quality. And then they were like, well, this thing it works. Why wouldn't we just ship it? And so then all of a sudden speed came along. But you end up at the exact same endpoint, but the motivations and the drivers are very different. And so as we've gone into each and every market, we're always kind of asking that question: is quality the thing that's actually the motivating factor for companies as they're trying to adopt CI/CD practices, or is it speed? And then how do you kind of bring the two pieces together? Because you're going to get both. You may not realize it. One may not be top of mind for you.
Yeah, it's a matter of, it isn't a controversy of which one. It's a matter of what your sort of center of design principle is, and you build the other into it, right?
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. I really enjoyed talking with you, and congratulate on the announcement to you and the team at Circle CI and the things that you've released, and sound like they're going to be very well used and needed in market if we understand the customers that you're serving and what some of their challenges are. So it's been really a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, look forward to having you on again, and we'll talk to you soon, Jim.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Great. Jim Rose, CEO with Circle CI.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Thanks, Mitch. Great interview today. All right, guys, for Wednesday, June 3rd, I think that's going to wrap up our show. We hope you're safe and well and strong, TechStrong. We'll be back tomorrow. We will be broadcasting some TechStrong Con tomorrow. Hope to see you then. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.